Hello, MCU fans. Today is going to be a follow-up to the mapping Phase 4 timeline without Disney+, and instead, this time I will be mapping Phases 1 through 3. And I honestly don't know if I would have gone to the trouble to do this because it did take a long time, but the comments are so helpful because people really encourage me to do stuff. And in particular, AK and the MC Giraffe, this one's for you, for both of you, because they really pushed me to do this. But I'm glad I did. It was well worth the effort. But I do read all the comments, and it helps me get ideas for new videos as well as make the existing content even better. You guys give me lots of good feedback, so thank you for all the comments. All right, similar to the previous video, I will no longer from this point use the words Disney and or plus, and instead will only use the information inside the movies and the one-shots to place them in the timeline. Now, in a few rare occurrences, I will have to turn to things like either the directors or the writers, because while it's not hard to place the years, it can be difficult to place the months. And if you really want to go to that level of detail, sometimes you do have to look to what they had to say. But for the most part, I'm only going to be looking at the movies themselves. Also, I will point out that phases 1 through 3, a kind of standing practice was that, unless said otherwise, they are being released at the same time they are happening in the MCU timeline. Kevin Feige said that over and over. So there's a few times, again, to get the month, we may have to go to that direction. But for the most part, we are just going to look at things inside the movies to map the timeline. So let's dive right in and see what we find out. All right, as before, we start with nothing. However, the obvious place to start is Captain America, the First Avenger. So let's see when this happened. Okay. Captain America took the super soldier serum in 1943. We know that from this headline, June 23rd, 43, which is telling the story of his heroics right after having taken the super soldier serum. Excellent. All right, we also know the movie ends and he goes on ice in March of 1945, March 5th particularly of 1945. Great. So we know the end of the movie. How about the beginning? When does Schmidt find the Tesseract? Well, already we're going to have to cheat a little bit if we want to get a month for this. In fact, even a year, because they don't give us any idea. And in this case, I'm going to look at something called the Cinematic Universe Timeline put out by Marvel right around the time of Avengers. And this thing goes into amazing detail, harmonizing all the movies up to Avengers. So I'm only going to use it when I have no other choice. But to figure out when Schmidt found the Tesseract, if we look at the timeline, notice everything is centered around when he said, Tony Stark said, I am Iron Man. So it's either BIM, before I am Iron Man, or AIM, after I am Iron Man. It's kind of like BBY and ABY in Star Wars, for those that love timelines in Star Wars. Anyway, notice, Johann Schmidt goes to Norway and steals the Tesseract in 1942. We know that because the movie ends in 1945, and they say that there's a 3-year difference between when he finds the Tesseract and when the movie ends. Okay, sure, we're going to use this simply because we have no other frame of reference. So we're going to go with March 1942 to March 1945 for Captain America. Whew. I promise, most of them won't be that difficult. All right, in fact, the Agent Carter one-shot is very easy. It happens 1 year later. So it's 1 year after March of 45, meaning it's in March of 1946. Awesome. And it's connected, obviously, because of Captain America. All right, then we have Captain Marvel. Now, Captain Marvel connects to Captain America because of the Tesseract, which is actually a huge connection between those two. All right, so when does Captain Marvel happen? Once again, this one's really easy. The camera pans and stays on long enough so you can definitely make it out, June of 1995 on this calendar. And I think in general, whenever Marvel makes sure you can see a date, then they want you to see it. I mean, there's times when a date appears, but you've got to slow pause and zoom and work really hard. That might just be an accident date. But when they make it really clear, and in this case it shows up while they're viewing the black box information about Carol's crash, then they want you to see it. So June of 1995. All right, easy. So, and then also Captain Marvel is eventually going to appear way down the road in Infinity War. So that's what this is to remind us that, she's coming back. All right, so then we move to Iron Man, the OG movie, right? When does it happen? Oh, sorry. First, it ties to Captain America because of Howard Stark. It ties to Agent Carter because of both S.H.I.E.L.D. and Howard Stark. And it ties to Captain Marvel because of Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. So nicely, everything before it, all the prequel stuff happens, ties right into Iron Man. So it's awesome. Okay, when does it happen? Well, we know he's in captivity for 3 months because that's what he says, and then he wants a cheeseburger. And he gets his cheeseburger, and he does a press conference saying we're no longer in the arms business, which leads to a Mad Money episode that happens to be dated in May of 2008. You can see in the upper right-hand corner there, May 4th in particular. So therefore, we can back up the point of his capture to February. And notice 2008. We're going to go with 2008, but that may not end up being the year for good. But all right, for now, it's 2008. So how long does the movie last, though? How long does it take after he comes back from captivity? Well, it's not real clear. So we're going to look again at this timeline, at least to see what Marvel is saying. And notice they're saying there is 9 months between the point of when he says Iron Man and the point of when he's captured initially by the 10 rings. That's interesting. I don't know that I would have thought the movie goes a full 9 months, but on the other hand, I don't think it's just a couple days or weeks after he gets back because he made several versions of his armor, tests them out, etc. So, okay, we'll trust them again because, again, finding the years, we can find those without effort. But finding the months, you kind of got to look at some other sources on occasion. So February through November of 2008. Okay, Incredible Hulk. We know it ties somehow to Iron Man because Tony Stark appears at the end. But when does it happen? Well, inside of Incredible Hulk, we see a 2007 date. Notice down there it says March 24th of 2007. And this is Blonsky's Rules of Engagement when they went after Banner when he was in Brazil. Okay, sure, then. The movie starts around March of 2007. Of course, there's flashbacks to way before 2007. But the main movie is in March of 2007. He's got to travel from Brazil to America. And of course, he doesn't use an airplane. It takes him a long time. So we'll say the whole movie takes a couple months. So we'll go with March to May of 2007. Now, I'm not going to move it up top of Iron Man because trust me, it's going to get retconned to death. Hulk is. So we're just going to keep it there for now because I'm not even going to take the effort to move it. You'll see why. All right, then we move to Iron Man 2, which obviously feeds from Iron Man. So when does it happen? Well, it tells us 6 months later at the beginning. And then after that 6 months later, we see the court or the congressional hearing where they're trying to figure out, hey, what are we going to do about you and your suit? Now, I kind of like the 6 months between Iron Man and Iron Man 2 because while I have said many times the government moves slow, because it does, in this case, we're talking about someone literally flying around in a WMD, a weapon of mass destruction. The government is going to want to understand what's going on here. Do we need to regulate this? And in fact, if you remember, Stark isn't necessarily the most heroic person at this point. He's still pretty cocky. He's still pretty, I can do what I want to do. So to me, yes, I can imagine 6 months after Iron Man, them holding this hearing. I will say, though, some people have interpreted the 6 months later to be 6 months after Venko built the suit, meaning we see all that stuff at the beginning where he's building the suit, and then 6 months after he builds the suit, he attacks Iron Man, which means there might be more time, therefore, between the two movies. However, I will point out, right, wrong, or indifferent, if we look at the Marvel timeline again, they say from the point of him saying, I am Iron Man, it is literally 6 months to the T when Tony is attacked by Venko at Monaco Grand Prix. So, okay, 6 months later. So when, though? Well, it's nice. It all works out because the Monaco Grand Prix is in May. So that again ties to a November feeding into May 6 months later. Then also, Tony Stark's birthday in a deleted scene from Avengers is revealed to be in the upper right-hand corner, May 29th of 1970. This is a deleted scene. Not sure if it's canon, but hey, it works. We got a birthday. And this fits really well with the movie because in the movie, he celebrates his birthday. So that means the movie is basically taking place from the end of May into a little bit of June. So May to June of 2009. Great. And of course, 2009 because it's after Iron Man. All right, what's next? Well, we got to deal with the fact that Iron Man 2 has some Incredible Hulk references in it. Notice that real time in Iron Man 2, we're seeing a WHIH newscast of the incident at Culver University. That, of course, happens in the middle of the Hulk movie. So basically, Iron Man 2 retcons the Incredible Hulk not to be in 2007, but to actually be during Iron Man 2. Okay, well, since it would be during the portion of the end of Iron Man 2, I'm therefore saying that he was in Brazil in April, then he gets finally to America. The part that synchronizes with Iron Man 2 is happening near late May, early June, and so we're now in April to June of 2009. Oh, but we're not done retconning Hulk yet. Give it time, we'll be back. In the meantime, though, a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer. One shot is pretty clearly at the end of Iron Man 2, at the end of end of May, because he leaves Iron Man 2, gets in his car, heads out, has a mini adventure, and then shows up in Thor. And yes, that means Thor is also happening around the same time. We don't even need to look to the movie for reference, but it doesn't matter because they don't really give us any reference in the movie. So it's also around this end of May, beginning of June timeframe. And then lastly, The Consultant is a one-shot that recontextualizes the end credit scene from Incredible Hulk, which of course now we've moved up by 2 years. And instead of Tony Stark going to try to get the Hulk, he ends up failing to get Abomination, which is really what Sitwell and Coulson wanted him to do to begin with. So this sequence of events here, from late May to early June, forms a week that was retconned into something called Fury's Big Week. I like the concept. The retconning is painful and hurts my head a bit, but the end result is kind of cool. And in fact, if we go back to this timeline, notice down at the bottom, Fury's Big Week in red on the left, and then end of Fury's Big Week. And they literally break it down by day and night, day and night, day and night, all the things that happen between the three movies. It's really cool. Total retcon, but really cool. So, okay, great. We got it, right? Done. We can finally move on. Yes, we can. We're going to move on to Avengers now. All right, so Avengers, when does it first of all, obviously it ties to everything. So Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and then even The Consultant ties in because Sitwell and Coulson appear in Avengers. So everything collects together. Yay. All right, when does it happen? Well, we know it's in 2012, if for no other reason than Endgame tells us clearly it is in 2012. So, okay, 2012, great. What else can we learn? Well, in the museum opening in Stuttgart, we see a date in the middle there of 4th of May, and it's M-A-I because it's not English, obviously. And this is the opening night because that's when Loki attacks. So pretty much they tell us it's May 4th. And I think this is a date that, yes, you do have to slow pause and look at, but it's on camera for a while. I actually think this is an establishing date. So I say we go with this, and it's May of 2012. Great. May of 2012. Okay, so we're done, right? Not necessarily, because in Avengers, there's 2 times that they seem to imply Fury's Big Week is within a year of Avengers. Nick Fury tells Thor, hey, it was a year ago in that New Mexico incident, and Black Widow says to Hulk, you've been more than a year without an incident. Now, more than a year could be way more than a year, but you would think she'd say more than 2 years if it had been, 2 or 3. So in both cases, they seem to imply it's about a year between Avengers and Fury's Big Week. Well, it's not. It's 3 years. So what's that mean? That means they retconned all of Fury's Big Week and now have retconned Incredible Hulk twice, and 3 times if you consider The Consultant. It's been retconned all the way to 2011. Okay, great. I like that. It makes sense to me that these things are happening in close proximity to Avengers. But what do we do with Iron Man then? Because Iron Man now is 2.5 years from Iron Man 2. Well, we could move it forward. In fact, if we look, let's see what Marvel says. Marvel says, hey, I think it's 2009. If you look at this, the timeline again, the difference between 1945, which is when we know Captain America ends, plus 64 means the point of him saying I'm Iron Man is 2009. Well, that's interesting. So even when this came out, they were already retconning Iron Man. But this doesn't totally make sense because 2009 is not 6 months before Iron Man 2. So at the 10-year anniversary, Marvel came out with another timeline. And notice now they are saying Iron Man is in 2010. So Marvel can't figure out when it is either. But part of this is not, I don't even blame Marvel that they can't figure out Iron Man. They can't figure it out because of the retconning. That's why they can't figure it out. They've changed things so many times. Well, it's also interesting that in Age of Ultron, when Ultron is scanning through the internet and looking at all these images of things, he looks at a couple that happened in Iron Man. And notice it's a 2010 date. So Marvel does seem to be consistent. They're saying, no, Iron Man's in 2010. By the way, the February date, that makes no sense because he didn't have this suit built in February. So, sigh. But anyway, this date could have worked better, though. This one's more in July. But again, 2010. So my only point in bringing this up is these dates are probably hokey to begin with, and you did have to pause to see them. But I do think Marvel is consistently saying 2010. We've moved it to 2010. Okay, so we'll move it to 2010 then. I still like this really well because I think it would be a short period of time between Iron Man and Iron Man 2. There's no way the government waited 2.5 years to call him in. However, we'll get to this eventually. We have not placed Civil War yet, but I do want to bring it up now because I always like to present anytime there's a crack in the timeline that I'm presenting, and this is a big crack because Civil War, Vision says it's been 8 years since Mr. Stark declared I am Iron Man. And Civil War, as we will see, we haven't placed it yet because we haven't got there, but it's in 2016, believe me. That would put Iron Man back in 2008. So, what do you do with this? Well, I will point out that Captain America Civil War had come out by the time this timeline was put out. So Marvel was aware of the 8-year statement when they said Iron Man's in 2010. So I don't know if that's them subtly saying, yeah, we goofed. He meant to say 6. I mean, you would think if anybody's going to get it right, it's Vision, right? Surely a computer can get the date right. But anyway, also, for the record, they have Black Panther wrong in here, and they have Infinity War wrong in here, because Infinity War is in 2018. There's no way it's 2017, and Black Panther is 2016. So, oi. You know, it's funny. People complain about the timeline issues, myself included, of Phase 4. But look at this. This is carnage. I mean, this is just craziness. Anyway, here's the bottom line. It is very tricky to place Fury's big week, and it's very tricky to place Iron Man. So do you put Iron Man in 2008 or 2009 or 2010? Do you put Fury's big week in 2009, 2010, or 2011? I personally think this makes the most things work, the most statements work, other than Vision's. However, I have no objection if somebody disagrees and says, nope, I'm putting Iron Man earlier or Fury's big week earlier. So, okay, I promise it's better from here. All right, item 47 is pretty easy. We know it's happening basically right after the attack in New York, so that's May of 2012. Okay, then we're going to move to Thor, because Thor the Dark World, picks up right after Avengers. I mean, literally, at the end of Avengers on the left, he's being taken away in chains, and at the beginning of Thor the Dark World, he's in chains in Asgard. So the very beginning starts right after Avengers. However, there is a big jump to the rest of the movie. And that's because Thor is off cleaning up all the 9 realms and trying to take care of all the problems that have happened. But notice this date in the middle of the page by the pen is 11/14/2013. And this is the release papers for Dr. Selvig after his little streaking incident in Stonehenge. So we know pretty well the rest of the movie is happening in November of 2013. Okay, great. So May of 2012, November of 2013. And also, this works well with a statement that Darcy makes at the end of the movie. When Thor is left and Jane's really bummed, Darcy's like, well, remember, last time he was gone for 2 years. Well, he does. He comes back. But the point is, the 2 years is referring to the first Thor movie. So, 2 years from Thor the Dark World, if you look back up, there's another reason to believe that Fury's big week happens in 2011, because that makes her statement work okay. So, okay, great. So we got Thor down. All right, how about Iron Man 3? When does Iron Man 3 happen? Well, we know it is 13 years after New Year's Eve of 1999, because they give us this at the beginning, 1999, and then there's several statements about 13 years ago. So that would put us New Year's Eve or Christmas time of 2012. And yes, it does turn out to be Christmas time, because there's Killian lighting up right in front of the Christmas decorations. Looks really good. That's a nice backdrop for you, Killian. Good call, man. So, December of 2012. Okay. And by the way, it's worth noting, this is why on some timelines, Thor the Dark World is placed before Iron Man 3, because the beginning of the movie does start before Iron Man 3. Bottom line is, Iron Man 3 is sandwiched inside the runtime of Thor the Dark World. So, whatever, right? I mean, watch them in whatever order you want, put them in whatever order you want in the timeline, but that's the dilemma. It starts before Iron Man 3 and ends after it. So, all right, fine. All Hail the King is really difficult. There's just nothing inside of it. I've watched it a couple times. I can't find even something to slow pause and zoom on to give me a date. So, because it was released about a year after Iron Man 3, we'll call it December of 2013. I hate that. I like things to be perfect and for us to find evidence. There just is none. If anybody's aware of it, let me know in the comments. But this will just get it on the map somewhere. And then, of course, Trevor later appears all the way down in Phase 4. So that line is to remind us he's going to appear later. All right. Then we move to Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Now, it connects with Agent Carter one-shot because, of course, of Peggy Carter. It connects to Avengers because it's the next appearance of Captain America. And it even connects to Item 47 because it's the next appearance of Sitwell. And it's also the last appearance of Sitwell. R.I.P. Sitwell. I loved him. He was a great character. All right, so when does it happen? Well, Captain America jokes about being, he's not dead. He may be 95, but he's not dead. Okay, so he's 95 years old in the Winter Soldier. Well, we know his birthday from Captain America is July 4th. Cute, huh? July 4th of 1918. So this has to happen before July 4th of 2014. Okay, great. So that works. And it would be after, I guess, obviously, July 4th of 2013. So, okay, great. What else do we know? Well, I don't know why they hid this date. I mean, Marvel seemed to be really clear about their dates up to this point. Well, no, actually, they retconned so many times, maybe they're embarrassed. They covered it up because they knew it was going to get retconned. It doesn't get retconned, though, I promise. So I don't know. I don't know why they covered it up. But still, you can see the little peak of a 4 there coming out above the roses. And bottom line is, it ain't a 5, because that we would see more of, and it ain't a 3. So it's a 4. Darn it, it's a 4. So they're establishing it's 2014. And by the way, if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, you won't get this Ezekiel 25:17 reference. But for those that have seen it, epic Easter egg. Absolutely epic for Samuel Jackson. All right. So unfortunately, I can't find anything in the movie that tells me the month. I mean, the year, it's 2014. We know that. And we know it's before July. But we don't know anymore. So I'm going to go, actually, I think it's one of the few times so far where we've had to say, we're going to look at when it was released, and it was released in April of 2014. So we're going to say it takes place in April. If anyone has a better placement, I'm all for it, but I don't believe there is a way to determine the month any further than that. All right. So we know that Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man all feed into Avengers Age of Ultron. Great. So when does Avengers Age of Ultron happen? Okay, so in the movie, Thor says, in the last few years, 4 Infinity Stones have shown up. And few is typically 3 or more, because a couple would be 2. So he's probably referring to the time since Avengers. And I'm assuming the 4 Infinity Stones would be the Space Stone, the Mind Stone, the Reality Stone, and maybe the Power Stone? Maybe when he took that weird bath and had the psychedelic trip. That part of the movie is so weird to me. He learned about the Power Stone there, I guess. But anyway, 4 stones have turned up in the last few years. So he's probably placing the movie around 2015, 3 years after Avengers. But we can do better than that. All right, so the reason I think it takes place in May, or mostly in May, is because of 2 things, both, unfortunately, from Civil War, which we still haven't placed yet, but trust me, it's in June of 2016. We're going to get there, I promise. But Iron Man first mentions Spencer, and this is Spencer, who tragically dies when he went to Sokovia for summer. And, of course, he gets killed during the battle where it basically drops from the sky. So, to be summer, you can't be any earlier than May, it would seem. I mean, May is about the earliest you could call summer, right? On the flip side, Baron Zemo in Civil War says, I've been plotting my revenge for over a year. And again, trust me, Civil War is going to be June of 2016. So for it to be over a year, well, that seems to place it pretty solidly in May. So I'm going to go, therefore, with end of April. There's a little bit in the end of April, and then stretching into May to fit both Spencer's situation, his tragic death, and, of course, Zemo plotting his revenge for a year. Okay, now we move to the Guardians of the Galaxy corner of the universe. So when does Guardians 1 happen? Well, we know it is 26 years after 1988, because the beginning of the movie is in 88, and it jumps 26 years, so that solidly places us in 2014. However, there is just nothing in the movie to give us any other frame of reference. So I'm going to go with when the movie came out. So it's, I think, the third time now I've had to use that crutch. But again, Marvel said repeatedly, when a movie comes out, that's when it's happening in the timeline, unless stated otherwise. Okay, great. So then we have the I Am Groot's Groot's First Steps, Volume 2 of Guardians of the Galaxy, and then the remaining 4 Groot shorts. So when do these happen? Oh, man. Again, no frame of reference other than we know Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 isn't long after Volume 1. That's mentioned in the movie, but no exact frame of reference. So in this case, I'm going to have to turn, I believe for the first and only time, to the creative team, in this case, James Gunn, who said it was 2 months. Okay. I mean, again, we know it's 2014, so we either just don't put a month or we trust James Gunn. So then we know that the First Steps is sometime in between 1 and 2, and then the rest of the shorts happen likely within the first couple months after Guardians 2. Okay, great. So then we move on to Ant-Man. When does Ant-Man happen? Well, the WHIH newscast, you might remember those. They were great. In fact, why aren't they on Disney Plus, darn it? We need to lobby Disney Plus to give us those. But anyway, in the newscast for Ant-Man, they mention his release as July 17. Now, depending on whether you consider these canon, that may not really count. They may not be considered, legit. But at the time they were released, these were considered legit. So I'm going to go with that to help us place July 17 for his release. Then we know it takes place after Age of Ultron, obviously because they raid Avengers Mansion, the new Avengers Mansion. So therefore, I'm going to go with July to August of 2015. All right, then we move to Civil War. Now, Civil War connects with, of course, Age of Ultron, because that's where everybody next appears, and, of course, with Ant-Man. Okay, we've talked a lot about Civil War, so let's place this thing. All right, when does it happen? Well, this newspaper article tells us 2016, because you can see it says 2016 election conversations. Then it has a date of March 22nd. So do they want us to use this? Could be. Let's keep this in the back of our heads. Then at the end is one of my favorite Stan Lee cameos where he's looking for Tony Stank. I love it. If you zoom and slow pause and enhance the dickens out of that FedEx package, you can get an April date. And we do know that there's a 2-month span in the movie because after the battle in Lagos, it's a month later that they sign the Sokovia Accords, or at least some of them do. So March to April would work. And that placement could work, but I think it becomes problematic with those references I mentioned when trying to place earlier movies. So let's look again at WHIH, this time to their Twitter account. And believe it or not, the Twitter account's still out there. You can go view it. And this tweet is still pinned out there. So they obviously think this is an important tweet. So they were literally tweeting real time at this point, which is pretty wild. I mean, to think that they were treating the Twitter account like it is an actual news account. Notice the tweet is May 3rd of 2016, and they have the breaking, Lagos is happening. Boy, so what do you go with? Do you go with dates that flew by pretty quickly, or do you go with a Twitter account and when they tweeted it? Well, the reason I'm more comfortable with this May date is, number one, Marvel absolutely thought this was legit. I mean, WHIH, they invested a lot of time and money into these suckers. Plus, I do believe that May is going to fit better overall. So I'm going to go with May to June, because remember, it's a month later that they're asked to sign the Accords. And now some of these references work. You know, the Zemo reference from a year ago, and Spencer getting the Sokovia dropped on him, etc. All right, so let's look at Civil War has a ton of helpful quotes. So Ross mentions it's been 5 years since his heart attack, which is presumably after Incredible Hulk, which again seems to place Fury's big week in 2011, because 2016 minus 5 is 2011. He also mentions that it's been 4 years the Avengers have been operating without jurisdiction. He's referring back to Avengers in 2012. Sam mentions to Black Widow, aren't you the one that told the government to kiss their butt 2 years ago? Also, at another point, he mentions they've been searching for Bucky, the Winter Soldier, for 2 years without any luck. So twice he mentions 2 years, which ties back to Winter Soldier in 2014. Zemo, I mentioned the Zemo quote a year ago. And then I got to bring it up because, again, I'm not trying to hide the fact that this is problematic with my placement of Iron Man. Vision mentions the 8 years ago. And, one of the reasons that it gives me pause to put Iron Man in 2010 is this is five quotes from Civil War, 4 of which are spot on. Wouldn't you think that the 5th one would be too? But then again, Marvel turns around and goes, nope, it's 2010 in their timelines, and 2010 just works thematically better. So at the end of the day, at least my guiding philosophy on timelines is, yes, I want to stick to exactly what people said in the movie. I really do. But more important to me is thematically, does it move the narrative forward? And I just don't think Iron Man in 2008 does. Anyway, enough of that. Okay, so I am going with May to June of 2016. Then we have all the fallout. Oh my goodness, Civil War. Takes 4 movies to fully deal with all of the issues. Black Panther, Black Widow, Homecoming, and Ant-Man and the Wasp. Wow. So let's dig into these. Oh, and then also Claw appears in Black Panther, and of course he first appeared in Age of Ultron. Okay, Black Panther takes place a week after Civil War. Why do we know this? Because T'Challa, just hard to think about him having passed. Wakanda Forever just came out, so he's really on my mind. Miss you, Chadwick. R.I.P., buddy. Man. Anyway, there you have T'Challa watching a newscast, which is 1 week ago, saying 1 week ago is when King T'Chaka, his father, of course, died in Civil War. So that firmly places Black Panther right after Civil War, and then the movie does span a little more than a month, so June to July. Black Widow, we know it's 2016, but they pretty much tell us that because in the beginning is a 1995 flashback, and then it's 21 years later. Plus, we know it immediately follows Civil War, and in fact, technically speaking, some of the scenes in Black Widow are happening simultaneously with the opening of Black Panther, which is pretty cool. All right, so how about Spider-Man Homecoming? Well, it's mostly in September, but the beginning is right after Civil War. So July or June, and then it says, hey, 2 months later, and then we have the most of the movie happening, which is in September. And you notice the decathlon there is September 14th. So it's mostly in June, or mostly in September, but the beginning is in June. Great. That works. All right. Then it is still worth mentioning, you don't know what to do with Homecoming, right? Because it had that infamous 8 years later. Why don't they digitally just fix that and put 4? Wouldn't that be nice? Because it ain't 8 years ago that Avengers happened. But it also has another 8 years reference. Now, this one is interesting because Happy says it's been 8 years that he's been carrying the engagement ring, which presumably Tony got it for Pepper. Knowing Tony, he got it randomly. But theoretically, it was for Pepper. Well, that again might want us to put Iron Man back in 2008 because it didn't seem like he really was into Pepper until, the Iron Man movie. But if you consider that he said repeatedly to Pepper, it's always been you. It's always been you. I kind of think it's bizarrely romantic, but still romantic if even when he was a playboy, even if when he was off, sowing his oats everywhere, he still knew Pepper was the one he was going to be with. So I do think this works that the ring was purchased in 2008, even if Iron Man's in 2010. Then you've also got the fact that they screwed up the 8 years later, so why not screw up this one, right? Anytime they have an 8 in Homecoming, don't trust it. Anyway, just bringing that up so you know all the facts. Okay, so Ant-Man and the Wasp, when does it happen? Well, we know that Ant-Man has been on home detention for 2 years. So 2018, that's easy. Question is, when in 2018? Well, you could say, well, that's easy too. 2 years from Civil War. It was exactly 2 years. But keep in mind, you can get your sentence reduced for time served in prison. And he was in the raft at least for a while. It's unclear how long he was in the raft. But man, you ought to get 2 or 3 times served for that. But anyway, the point is, I could see it being as early as May, no earlier than May. But he could get some time served. All right. So, in Ant-Man and the Wasp, it looks like it might be April to May because down in the far right corner, if you can read it on this screenshot, you have really good eyes. But if you watch it on a really large screen, you can see a date. And it seems like it's so rare they have dates on laptops and phones that it seems like they want you to see this date. Now, I think it says April 30th of 2018. I have heard others have different interpretations because it is really foggy, but it works well for it to be the end of April, thus making Ant-Man and the Wasp end of April and into May. So I'm going to go with April to May of 2018, and I'm going to assume that he got it around a month of his sentence reduced because of time already served in prison. Okay, then we jump over to Doctor Strange. When did that happen? Well, they give us a real clear date on this one. February 2nd of 2016 is clearly seen on Steven's watch, and this is at the beginning of the movie before he gets in that accident. So the beginning of the movie is 2016 February. Great. The ending of the movie, we know it's in winter because of the snow. And man, what an amazing scene, huh? One of the more powerful scenes in phases 1 through 3, honestly, was Ancient One's death. But it's clearly snowing. So is it the beginning of the winter or is it the end of winter? Well, let's turn to the Ancient One again, maybe get an idea. In Endgame, when they're back in time during the time heist in 2012, and Banner's looking for Doctor Strange, the Ancient One says, you're about 5 years too early. Well, 5 years from May, remember we know it's May of 2012, would be May of 2017. And she says you're about 5 years too early. So I kind of tend to think the movie splashes into 2017. So that's why I'm saying it ends in January of 2017. Could even be later. Again, this one's tough because they just do not give us any specific amounts. We know it's several months because there's a lot that goes on in the movie. But whether it's the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, certainly up for debate. All right. Then we have Thor Ragnarok, which ties, of course, to Avengers Age of Ultron because it's the next appearance of Thor. And, of course, it ties to Doctor Strange because he appears. So when does this happen? Well, we absolutely know the year. It's 2 years after Age of Ultron because Thor tells Banner, Sokovia, that was 2 years ago when he left Earth. And likewise, then later, Banner shouts back at him, angry, he says, hey, I've been the Hulk for 2 years. Give me a break here. Now, of course, we know time on Sokovia, we know time on Sakaar is different. So really, he probably was the Hulk for way more than 2 years. But as far as Banner thinks, it's 2 years. So I just want to stress that Sakaar has some funky time. But it's been 2 years since Age of Ultron. So we know, therefore, 2017. But when in 2017? Well, I mean, their clothing is colder weather. The trees, though, look like they have some leaves, to be honest. So I don't know what to do with it, but we need it to be close to Infinity War. Not too far away. So the movie did come out in November. So I am going to go with November. I could see moving it a little earlier in 2017, but if you remember the end credit scene, that's Thanos' ship. And granted, they had to travel in a slow-moving ship through space for quite a while. So there can easily be a big gap between Ragnarok and Infinity War, but I think the closer the better. Speaking of Infinity War. All right, so Infinity War, man, everything ties to it, right? Ragnarok, Black Panther, Black Widow, Homecoming, Ant-Man and the Wasp. In comes Captain Marvel, right? Remember that line from Captain Marvel? Feels like forever ago. The Guardians tie in. And then anyone in Civil War who hasn't appeared yet in a movie. So particularly Vision and Scarlet Witch, Falcon, etc. So, yeah, everything culminates down to Infinity War. So when does it happen? Well, in Far From Home, Betty seems to imply it's early in semester 2 of their junior year because she very frustratingly says, hey, we were halfway through the school year, we'd taken our midterms, then we get blipped, then we come back and we have to redo junior year. What's up with that, right? So, she's not saying it has to be January, February. It's got to be after that or around that time or later, but it seems like she would have said we were almost done with the year if it was further into the year. However, it kind of does need to be further into the year for a couple reasons. Number one, these trees are hard to... the other trees that we saw in Thor Ragnarok were kind of in the background. Maybe that was an accident. These are really apparent in Infinity War. It is clear we are in April, May, time frame. Then you've got the fact that Tony Stark says, hey, Thanos has been in my head for 6 years. And he's referring, of course, to May of 2012. So, it doesn't have to be exact 6 years, but that works out pretty well. And then, of course, Vision and Scarlet Witch talk about the fact that they've been testing out their relationship for the last 2 years. So that's where they've been. So So it's got to be 2 years later, therefore, than Civil War. So it's got to be 6 years after Avengers and 2 years after Civil War. So May works because they are still in school, right, in May. And in fact, it's all the more annoying to think that they were so close to being done, right? They were so close. So we know it's got to be before May, because if it was June, they'd be done, basically. So, all right, we're going to go with May of 2018 for Infinity War. Okay, and then Infinity War then is going to finally finish us off and connect into what I've already done, which is Phase 4. So look down at the bottom of Infinity War and you'll see a little boop, the little line there, which is telling us now, oh, and then also Trevor. We got to bring Trevor in. Remember, that was forever ago, it feels like. We talked about Trevor from the one-shot All Hail the King, because he's going to appear in Phase 4. So now we have actually an updated Phase 4. So notice the line that came from Infinity War is going into Endgame, and then Trevor heads into Shang-Chi, where he makes his big appearance. Also, Wakanda Forever. I'm going to do a second video on that, because I really want to thank everybody who's given me such great comments about trying to place it. I am moving it forward a month because it just didn't look very wintry. And it's supposed to be simultaneous with Thor, so great. That would put it in October. But yeah, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy hasn't come out yet, so we'll get an update after that. So let's do a real quick recap, because I think there's some interesting things to observe. If we go back to the first part of this timeline, notice what we keep seeing through phases 1 through 3 is these collector points. Avengers is a big collector point. I mean, kind of Fury's big week is a collector point. Then Age of Ultron is a collector point. Civil War is a collector point. And obviously, Infinity War is a huge collector point. So while the timeline, spreads around, and you got the Guardians section up there all by itself, but then it connects into Infinity War, Doctor Strange, but then he connects in, everything keeps coming together. You could argue that's why Phase 4 has been a little harder to work with timeline-wise, because it's kind of all over. I mean, yes, there's the multiverse section over on the right there, but other than that, it's kind of hodgepodge. And that's not negative. I'm not being negative on the timeline. I don't mind that it doesn't have a collector point, but it really does help when in phases 1 through 3, we just had these points where everything came together and we know the timeline is meshed. It's not really meshing. In fact, I don't think Phase 5 is going to be any more clear. I think it won't be till Phase 6 before we really get those collector points with Secret Wars and Kang Dynasty. So, whatever, right? But then also I would want to point out, we talk about Phase 4 having a little bit of a sloppy timeline at times and hard to figure out. I think it's solved. I think this is right for what it's worth. But really, look back at Phase 1. Good night. That was insane. And even Phase 2 still had some retcons. So, it's just hard. It's hard to build a universe like this, but I still wish that they had a timeline keeper that was on it a little better. They have a timeline keeper, but I'm not sure how much they're really paying attention to all this. Anyway, there you have it. That is now Phases 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course, I'll do an update if anything changes in Phase 4, and then we'll continue on into Phase 5. I will post this on my Google Drive, and I'll put a link to it in the comments in case you want the last 4 phases 1, 2, 3, and 4 all in one presentation. And in the meantime, you can like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.